Impressions and misunderstandings. When somebody mentions the word church to you, I wonder what goes through your head. You may have had really good understandings and experiences of a church at some point in your life, or you may have had, of course, negative experiences. You may have heard about the activities of a nearby church from family, from friends, or from neighbours. Now, a lot of conclusions are drawn very quickly about what the church is, or what it might be, because of something that somebody else said. And yet it's also a well-known characteristic of we human beings that we come to conclusions about challenging questions which we prefer to minimise or dismiss the question because we're unsure what it might mean for us if we choose to get too close. What might I find? What might I discover if I personally decide not to dismiss it as boring or irrelevant or something which doesn't meet my needs? We have to keep challenging ourselves. We have to keep challenging this tendency to avoid things. We have to keep challenging this all too easy dismissal of the church. We have to keep challenging these conclusions which are reached without much, if any, experience at all, or much willingness to learn, or the courage to explore. At the heart of the question that the church presents the world with is realism and honesty and acknowledgement about what human beings and the world in which we live need. First, there is nothing boring about the gift of the gospel. Christ's words and actions beautifully held together in this gift to the church, a gift he entrusted himself to the church. There is nothing boring about the actions of Jesus at the altars of his church, where he said, "Do this." What's more likely to be boring is our insensitivity, which we all suffer from, our inability to be able to perceive, to be aware, to be sensitive to the presence, the work and the life of God himself behind the words and actions which he gave to his church. Could it be that our own spiritual imaginations are perhaps the bit of our life which is more boring than it could be? That we perhaps become unimaginative. Maybe we're over-dependent on the trend to try and fill our lives with multiple experiences and expect everything instantly. Have we perhaps become so caught up and influenced by the style and the influence of other people that we can't locate substance, our own, far more engaging and real identity? Just what are we human beings actually about? Where do we discover what might be really relevant to our lives? How do we measure what is actually meant by relevance? What might be relevant to being human, the needs of the world in which we live? And what about the old criticism that the church can't and doesn't somehow meet my needs? Who defines what we need? How do we learn what our real needs are? One of my favourite themes in school assemblies is when we often meet to talk about the difference, explore the difference between what we need and what we want. They're two very different things, and children get this very, very quickly and enjoy the exploration of the question. I wonder how much we expose ourselves as adults to this simple question. For the church, what we need is something which begins in the mind of God, and it explains the way that he responded to what he saw in human beings and the world that we live in. We all like to pretend that our needs are more refined or special than the needs of others. And yet at the heart of Christian love is a calling to love those amongst whom we live, for who they are, not for whom we might prefer them to be. When God became man in Jesus, he didn't choose the equivalent of an ideal destination with perfect, agreeable company who were all very like-minded. He revealed what it meant to love the people and the place, wherever, whenever, whoever. So what might we begin to think when we hear the word church? There are many ways of describing the church which become more and more engaging the more we explore its life, what brought it into being and existence in the first place. But one way I describe it is as follows. When you get under the surface, the church is a divine gift. I know that's hard to imagine sometimes, but try to get under the surface, behind the appearance of what we might see and hear. It's a divine gift, often buried in the midst of ordinary, fallible human beings, who share in the same questions and complexities of life as anybody else. And yet so often hidden in the daily concerns of everyday life and everyday people. It rises to reveal its own life, the perfection of Christ, glimpsed occasionally as human need and the church's prayer coincide. It can be described as Christ's workshop, shaping us for life and for death. All of the many ways we have to describe it are principally what it's called to be, called to become. And we often use terms which may seem far-fetched, but they're deliberately visionary terms because it's a body of people, flawed and fallible, but amongst whom God reveals his desire to draw all people to himself. We can say that the church embodies Christ's own life in its words and in its actions which he himself handed on to us. It gives us a vision of the kingdom of heaven for which Jesus himself taught us to pray.